Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Briefly, I wanted to recap the cave allegory from last time. So, as you remember, we began, we were reading this strange dialogue between Socrates and Glaucon, two old Greek guys. And the excerpt was looking at the difference between knowledge and opinion, between knowing something and thinking you know something. Right? Everybody thinks they know something. Everyone's an expert these days. When back in the day, people were far humbler to what they thought they knew or didn't know. But even then, it's a common error. And the reason why people used to think that Socrates was the smartest man in the world was because he said that he knew almost nothing. He had lots of ideas, but to claim real knowledge about something is a tricky thing. To illustrate that, he had the cave allegory, which says that, from a very young age, people are put in this cave and only see the shadows thrown across in front of them. They can't even turn around, right? See the walkway behind them, the fire behind that, the people carrying stuff. They think that those shadows are actually real. And that these shadows in our life, because we obviously aren't prisoners stuck in a cave somewhere, are all of our beliefs. Right? Everything you think is true and false, and everything you think is right and wrong. And as children, we very much inherit the beliefs, values, and facts. The world is flat, people are equal, they're not equal. The world is moving, the world is stationary. There's life after, there's reincarnation, there's not reincarnation. All of these things our children assimilate. They're basically computers without an antivirus software. They just take everything in, right? And then a prisoner somehow breaks his chains, turns around, realizes that the things he used to believe in, good things happen to good people, you can trust all adults, my parents are going to be together forever, Santa Claus is real, all these things, he's suddenly confronted with contradictory evidence. Politicians are actually public servants, whatever it is that you once believed that you no longer do. Yeah, we only go into wars for, altruistic motivations, So, makes his way out of the cave, comes back in, and what did they think? What did Socrates posit would happen to the prisoner upon re-entering the cave? Would he be greeted as a hero and a savior, freeing everyone from their bondage, right? Showing them a larger world? No, in fact, the prisoners in there who don't know they're prisoners because it's all they know, right? If it's all you know, you have no reference for comparison. Would see him as a crazy person, much the way we viewed Galileo, who came along and said that no, the world is not at the center of the universe. The sun is at the center, and we rotate around the sun, and there's other planets, and etc., etc. This was heresy to the Catholic Church. And so he was viewed, and the same with the first abolitionists for slavery. You think that the first people coming along being like, hey, actually we shouldn't own people. This is inhumane, this is barbaric. You think they were greeted as liberators, like, oh, hey, thank you for pulling, this, dim lens that I looked at the world through off of my face so I can, see clearly, right, that we're all, human beings underneath, and that our similarities are far stronger than our differences in almost all cases, right? No, they wouldn't, right? They would only double down on their ill-conceived notions of right and wrong, true and false. And so thus is the cave allegory. And the idea is, how do you know you make it out of the cave, right? How do you know that the things you now know, right? Whatever it is that you learn, knowledge you've gained since childhood, right? Whatever notions you've dispelled. Often the sort of knowledge we actually know is something that's not true, right? Rather than something that is true. I know that many of the things I was taught in public school are not actually the best. To be quiet and sit still and just wait, right? That's not going to get you ahead. Closed mouth, don't get fed, as one wise one said. And so, I then went on to make the point that in the realm of ethics and morality, we tend to think that this is just, there's no real right or wrong. It's kind of what people feel it is, right? And I challenge that most people probably come into the class as some sort of a relativist, right? Either morality, right and wrong, is up to whatever a person really feels like it is, right? Or right and wrong is simply what a culture determines, socially approved habits. And there's no outside basis, right? If you believe in God, you might say God's will is like the reference frame. But if you don't, and you still want some hard way of figuring out ethics and morality, it doesn't seem to, science hasn't really addressed ethics and morality. Science, right, deals largely in facts, not values. Now, I think science could be applied to facts, or values, sorry, and I will introduce us to that idea. But this is the distinction, right? And I make the case that just because something is optional does not make it relative, right? So we can't choose to avoid the laws of physics, right? Laws of physics are going to happen to us every time. And that's one of the reasons we think that they're laws, is because there's no avoiding them, right? That's not the case with morality. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. These are things that people can choose to do. In fact, they do it every day. And a lot of us think that because people can do these bad things, that makes ethics and morality just relative. It's whatever people want it to be. And I just want to challenge that, and push back a little and say, just because something's optional doesn't make it relative. And just because something's subjective doesn't make it relative. And I mean subjective in the sense that, it doesn't have independent matter and energy. Subjective is a thought that, an observer has, or an individual has. That could be words, theories, ideas, numbers. Numbers don't exist. You can't go look at number 4 in nature, right? Numbers are ways that our brain has of organizing stuff around us, right? But no one thinks that just because numbers are subjective, they don't have independent matter and energy, doesn't make them real or true, right? So that's how I'm using subjective here. Later on, we'll see subjective used in a more relative sense. But for here, subjective just means ways our brains have of organizing and filtering ideas and sensations, perceptions, that sort of thing. Just because things are subjective, like ethics, morality, good and bad, justice doesn't exist independent of humans. If we cease to exist, morality would cease to exist. Animals don't really deliberate over whether there's an absolute justice or whether it's all up to individuals. They deal on as far as we know, we're slowly expanding the realm of personhood to animals, but I don't think they're there yet. Just because something's optional and just because it's subjective doesn't make it relative. And the example I used was the scientific method. The scientific method is subjective. It doesn't exist outside of us. It's a way that Bacon and Descartes figured out for discerning true knowledge, predictable knowledge about the world around us, about matter and energy. Right? But it doesn't exist independent of them. Right? It's just subjective. Right? It's a way of testing things, a way of knowing and specifying what you can know. Right? It's also optional. Most of human history, people didn't practice the scientific method. They burned people alive, they looked at entrails, they did smoke signals, they starved themselves and had, fasting trances, to sort of get insight into these things. But if you want true, reliable information about the world, you employ the scientific method. Both optional and subjective. But no scientist anywhere in the world thinks the scientific method is relative, right? Anyway, that more or less is how I want us to walk away from the cave allegory. Just keeping in mind that when you want to jump and judge something else, ask, I really don't care what your conclusion is in most cases. What I am very interested in and want to strengthen is the reasoning that you use to justify your conclusion, okay? So whenever you're going to say if something's right or wrong, or good or bad, I want you to think of if you have reasons or if you're just shooting from the hip, going off, instincts from your childhood. So, with that said, we will move forward into the next part of this, where we look at the beginning of Book 2 of the Republic. All right, see you soon.